Ukraine has liberated Klishchiivka, but Zelensky seems to be purging more corruption from his administration. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's September 18th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, taking a look at the control map, the biggest change and updates as of yesterday. Shout out to those of you that were on the live stream. We literally watched this change happen in real time, is the liberation of Klishchiivka. And we've been talking about this for a little while, where it appears that Russia really is going to be using this dual windbreak system in order to form a natural barrier where they can create a sustainable and very efficient defense, right? It will I can't even talk today. It will require less personnel to man this than if they tried to hold this entire town. By some maps that we looked at, Klishchiivka actually surrounded by some hillsides, so the forces holding Klishchiivka were under considerable military pressure. A lot of fire, a lot of observation, very hard to hold positions here. So it makes sense that the Russian military would not fight tooth and nail to hold it. But again, I say that they have basically been fighting tooth and nail to hold it. You can see Ukrainian forces occupying these heights above Klishchiivka around the 1st or the 2nd, and then slowly, systematically pushing the Russians out over the course of about a week or 10 days. Now, of course, Russian forces are almost certainly digging in all along this rail line here, but it still completes what was a logical chain of events since the fall of Andriivka. You can see here that Russian forces getting forced out of Andriivka about about 3 days ago. This was then followed by, of course, Russian forces being forced out of Klishchiivka. Again, I'm using withdrawing, but they were almost certainly withdrawing under a lot of fire and a lot of pressure from Ukrainian forces. So it's interesting to see that the counteroffensive in and around Bakhmut, at least over the last maybe 2 weeks, has actually offered considerably greater returns than the last 2 weeks in the Zaporizhzhia front. You can see here, fast forward the last couple weeks, you can see that in terms of total territorial change, there's been minimal changes. The biggest changes, of course, are between Russian forces, who Russians are continually reinforcing Verbova and Novoprokopivka in an effort to blunt this, what Ukraine is hoping to turn into a breakthrough. This is kind of a feature or a function of the positional warfare that we've seen. Because Russia's defensive efforts have slowed Ukraine's ability to create these blitzkrieg-style offensives, the result is that when Ukraine does have a breakthrough, Russia has time to reposition its forces and deploy them to stop it, right? And if Ukraine were to sit there and go, oh, well, we're having success in and around Klishchiivka, let's remove these brigades, move them over to Klishchiivka and throw them into the fight, well, Russia would do the exact same thing. It would just move its own forces to the same spot. So Ukraine would probably experience a brief period of advancement, and then Russian forces would pivot to the defensive. So this is sort of the problem in this positional warfare, where it's almost like boxing in slow motion, right? If you were to box even a boxer like Mike Tyson at 1/10 of his normal speed, you would be able to counter and block and dodge his punches. And in fact, you would probably be able to do so even if you were moving at 1/10 the speed, because you would see them moving with so much advanced time that even though he might be the more skilled fighter, the time you have to react and block would be sufficient. That's kind of what we're seeing here, I suspect. Looking at the combat map, you can see Russian forces. Again, I think this underreports the total number of attacks. It's focused on Bakhmut and Donetsk City. Likely Russian forces trying to cover their withdrawal out of Klishchiivka with these counterattacks. But we can be certain that there is a robust attacking and counterattacking happening in this salient here in the Verbova region. In fact, when we go over to X, which is the rumor mill. So, bear in mind that you don't take this as anything other than rumors. This actually several accounts are reporting that there's been some really heavy attacks and counterattacks in and around the Verbova village. You can see here with Russian and Ukrainian forces fighting to try to get a foothold in the village itself. And as we've talked about, this village is a strong point in Russia's defensive lines in the south. You can see here that while Ukraine controls some of these lines, ultimately they probably can't start to roll them unless they hold Verbova. Once they can get Verbova, you can see the town itself is almost entirely surrounded by Russian lines. So cracking into them, this is like a hinge or like a strong point within this defensive network. If they could take Verbova, then a lot of these other defensive lines are going to become much easier for Ukraine to kind of roll up and roll over. Now, the one thing, of course, I wanted to talk about, if you're interested in seeing the combat footage from these engagements, I can't show it to you here, but I do a deep dive analysis of it. Actually, twice a week, we drop the latest combat videos on combatvetnews.com. And I can't even show you the thumbnails from the members only content because it will get me demonetized on YouTube. But if you want to check it out, you can become a member. Any one of these tiers is going to get you access to the members only area as well as a members only Discord. And you'll get access to twice a week the latest combat footage coming at us from the front line. I do all the analysis, the deep dives. We can usually identify the front line and sometimes the exact place the fighting is taking place if we can get a date on it. So it's insights we can't get anywhere else. Plus, it's the best way to support the channel. So again, go check us out at combatvetnews.com. The link's also in the description. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about Ukrainian government. They have dismissed all 6 of their deputy defense ministers. Now, you may know that a couple of weeks ago, the defense minister was sacked though no one in the Ukrainian government said this, it was implied that it was due to a corruption investigation, or at least implied that the minister failed to address known instances of corruption. Well, it seems like that purge is spreading to all 6 deputy defense ministers. Ukraine, of course, getting rid of these folks, and it's not really clear why, but this is probably part of a large overhaul of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. Jesus, this site is terrible. And you remember they've recently appointed a new defense minister, so it seems likely that as part of this is not uncommon in governments, right? You appoint a new minister. He has subordinates who he trusts and has worked with a lot, who share his vision of how a defense ministry should be run. And it's likely that he's gone to Zelensky and said, hey, I can't make things happen with these old defense ministers. Bear in mind that the current crop of defense ministers actually predates the war. So these are peacetime Ukrainian defense ministers in a country that, by most objective measures, still has has a level of corruption much higher than most EU countries. And so the replacement of these established political appointees with personnel that the current defense minister has worked with is probably going to work in the favor of Ukraine. I think ultimately I'm a believer that, being a peacetime defense minister is a very different animal than being a wartime defense minister. And when you look at someone like Donald Rumsfeld, who was brought in to sort of bring fiscal and organizational discipline to a peacetime military, suddenly found himself running a wartime military, there was a lot of justified criticism about the fact that he took this military to war with seemingly insufficient gear, insufficient equipment, insufficient training in some cases, and those criticisms were justified. But again, if you are a cost cutter, efficient organization, businessman, you're not going to understand that war doesn't operate like Amazon or a McDonald's. You've got to ensure that you're prepared. The difference between business and warfare is that in warfare, right, a powerful adversary wakes up every day and their only objective is to create for you your worst case scenarios. They actively work towards it. In a company, right, even you may have competition, but that competition is motivated primarily by money. Their victory, right, is to make money. And so you never really have the sort of high level conflict that is inherent to war. And so if you prepare a military like a corporation, you're going to end up having a bad time, right? You're going to have a more brittle, fragile system that's more easily broken because if you run it, if you can't be efficient and resilient, right? You need flex in your systems, but the only way to build flex into the systems is to give them more resources than they need. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you. Thank you so much to everyone at Combat Vet News, particularly our Colonel tier members and our Lieutenant tier members. Thank you guys so much, each and every one of you, as well as all the members of CombatVetNews.com. I couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.